on Facebook. Okay, perfect. Okay, so hi everyone. I am live on both Instagram and Facebook right now. So today is day one of the soup challenge. Hi Sima, thanks for joining. So today is day one of the 3 day soup challenge. I'm really excited about this. It's been a while since I've done a challenge, and I wanted to, kind of just do something that's especially for those who are in the Northeast or in cold regions. Soup is really comforting and cozy in the winter. So, we're going to be making tomato soup today, and I'm really excited about that. It's a super simple recipe, and I'll go through and just kind of show you, some of the things that you can do and kind of, change things around, change the flavors around, and all of that. So, I'm going to go through also the ingredients that we'll be using today. For those who signed up via the link that I had sent out, you already received the recipes, so you can also follow along with me. But for those who haven't signed up and are interested, you can just send me a message on either Facebook or Instagram, and I'll send you the recipes. It's a completely free challenge, and you'll get 3 new recipes to try. And the great thing about these recipes are that you can actually, they freeze really well. So you can, create a batch, because obviously if we're making soups 3 days in a row, you might not be able to, finish everything. So these actually freeze really well as well. So, and I'll show you all of that too. So to get started, now, generally, I don't use oil. So oil tends to be very, it's very highly processed. Most oils are very highly processed. So when I'm cooking, I try to avoid oil, especially, it has added a lot of added calories that are just completely unnecessary, are unhealthy. You don't actually need them at all. So instead of oil, I actually use either water or vegetable broth. And I just want to show you real quick. This is one of the vegetable broths that I use. It's by Pacific. It's low sodium. It's very clean ingredients, and there's no onions in it. Obviously, you can also make your own too, but I chose to just like buy it because it's easier. So to get started, I'm going to be using. Now this is, if you have the recipes, I mentioned that you'll need 1 medium onion. Now instead of onions, I'm actually using shallots today. I wanted to kind of like change up the flavor just slightly. I know that onions have kind of a stronger flavor, and I wanted to kind of try out shallots today, but you can use onions, you can use shallots. I've actually used green onions for this too. So you can also use green onions, which is obviously a lot easier to use rather than dicing an onion or a shallot. So I'm just peeling this, and I'm going to just kind of dice it. It doesn't have to be, exact, because this is actually going to be blended. So once we finish the recipe, once it's cooked, we're actually going to blend it. So it's really not that important to have, small dice, medium dice, whatever. It's, just finely, just kind of roughly chop it or dice it. And that's what I'm doing with the shallot. So I'm using 2 shallots. And if you're using an onion, then you would want about 1 medium onion. And if you're using green onions, you can probably use, I don't know, maybe like 3 green onions, or 3 to 5, depending. And that does not have to be cooked for very long either, as well as the shallots. And I'll show you also. So if you have the recipe, you'll notice that I mentioned that the onions have to cook for, like 10-15 minutes or so. But if you're using shallots or if you're using green onions, it doesn't have to be cooked for that long. And even with onions, I did a demo just this Monday actually for Evolve Pink. which is a nonprofit. It's a breast cancer nonprofit. I'm a nutrition ambassador for it, and we actually made tomato soup. And I didn't cook it for very long. Obviously, the longer that you cook the onions, the more caramelized the onions will be. So that's kind of why, you know, you might want to do that. But for today's purpose, because I am live and I don't want to be just kind of sitting here, standing here for 15 minutes watching the onions cook. So instead of that, I'm actually just going to cook it for just a couple of minutes, just so you can, I wanted to show you how to do it, and then you can kind of play around with it. So I added about 3 tablespoons of vegetable broth in here. I'm just going to let this heat up just a little bit, and then I'm going to put the shallots in there and just cook it down for a couple of minutes. The other ingredients, and this is such a simple recipe, so the other ingredients that you'll want is I have a can of organic crushed tomatoes. You can use any tomatoes that you have. I just happen to get crushed tomatoes, but you can use whole tomatoes, which you'll probably have to cook it for a little bit longer, but with the crushed tomatoes, you don't have to cook it for that long. And because they've already kind of, like, you can see it, they've already kind of, you know, fallen apart. And I'm actually trying fire roasted tomatoes today, which usually I just use, you know, regular tomatoes that don't have a lot of added ingredients to it. But today I decided to use the fire roasted, and it'll kind of give it just a little bit of a kick. So now I'm going to add in the shallots. And again, you'll just want to cook this down for just a few minutes, just to make it a little bit softer. You are going to cook everything together with the tomatoes for about 15 minutes. So it's really just, you know, trying to at this point, you're just trying to get some flavors in there with the onions. The other thing that we'll need is crushed red pepper. This is optional, but it does give it a nice kick to it. I am using fire roasted tomatoes today, so I might not want to add as much of this to it today. And then I'm also using Himalayan salt. I choose not to use like the iodized salt because it's highly processed, often bleached. So I try to use Himalayan salt or sea salt as much as I can. So I have this on medium heat right now. And then the other thing that while this cooks, I'm just kind of showing you some of the other ingredients. I have about a 1/3 cup of cashews. Now this this recipe is completely vegan, plant-based, dairy-free. Most people, I mean, there are so many people who have dairy, dairy issues, and just like dairy, just doesn't work for them anymore, especially as people get older. They realize that just dairy just doesn't work for their digestion and for their bodies. So cashews are a really great source of good fats, good calories, and it makes recipes super creamy. So I use cashews a lot. I know that sometimes people are allergic to cashews, so you can definitely use, you can even play around with like plant-based yogurts and to kind of give it that creaminess. You can try other nuts as well. So I have about a 1/3 cup, and I'm going to add, I already have some water boiling. So I'm going to add, just kind of cover the cashews with the boiling water, and that'll actually soften it up so that so the cashews are going to go into the blender with everything else, and just adding a little bit more vegetable broth. Like I was saying, in the blender, you'll just want to add, the contents of the tomato soup, and then add the cashews, blend it, and that's it. So it's pretty simple. And the other thing I wanted to mention too, so like I mentioned, I try not to use oil when I'm cooking. When you're using like water or vegetable broth, you do have to watch it a little bit, and especially when you're kind of starting off to reducing your use of oil, you'll kind of get used to it. But it takes a while. I know that like when I first went oil free, it took me a while to learn how to cook without oil. So there is a learning curve, but you kind of have to play around with it. You might have to add more water or vegetable broth to it, versus like oil, where oil tends to kind of like stick around on, you know, in the pan, but water and vegetable broth might evaporate, so you might need to add just a little bit more. So the shallots are getting pretty soft now. They're definitely softening up. They're getting a little bit more translucent. So at this point, I do want to add the tomatoes in here. So this is a 20-ounce can of crushed tomatoes. And they are organic. I try to get organic as much as I can, especially for certain ingredients. I did want to mention too is when you're buying, you know, different products, always look at the ingredients list. That is definitely more important than the nutrition facts. So you'll see here in this can, it's just tomato puree, fire roasted tomatoes, citric acid, and sea salt, and that's it. So it's very simple. And then the other thing I wanted to mention too is you'll also want to see if, like when you're buying cans, you'll try to get BPA-free lining cans, because BPA is very toxic and many cans have that. So I'll just show you right here. It says non-BPA lining right here. So I just wanted to mention that. So I have the tomatoes in here. I have the shallots, or onions if you're using onions. And I'm just gonna let that cook. So if you're using crushed tomatoes, you don't have to do anything in terms of like crushing the tomatoes or anything, because it's already crushed. So that definitely makes it a lot easier. But if you have a can of, like, let's say whole tomatoes, or if you're using actual, you know, not canned, but actual tomatoes, not in a can, like fresh tomatoes, you'll want to just cook this down for 5 minutes or so, and then just like crush it with the spoon. I think we have okay, so I have a question on the brand of tomatoes. So this one is the Muir, if I'm saying it right, the Muir Glen tomatoes, but there's other great brands. I know Eden Organics is a really good brand for if you're buying canned items, because all of their products are BPA free. So that's a really good one. And I know that there's a couple of others, but those are the two that I can kind of remember offhand that are really good. So I hope that answers your question. So I'm just cooking this for a bit. The other thing, so after this kind of cooks down for a couple of minutes, I have it on medium, and it is like boiling a little bit as well. And it looks really good already. If you can kind of see here, it looks pretty good. We are going to add in, once this cooks down for a couple of minutes, we're going to add in about 1.5 cups of vegetable broth. Now, if your vegetable broth and your tomatoes have salt in them, you can adjust the salt that you add into your soup. And if you are salt free, then you don't have to add any salt at all. And that's why in the recipe I didn't put an amount, because it really just depends on the other ingredients, like the vegetable broth and the tomatoes that you're using. If they already have added salt, you might not want to add extra salt in there. Okay, so really the last couple of things that we're going to do. Now this is kind of cooking, it's boiling. So I'm adding in 1.5 cups of this vegetable broth. And I wanted to mention too that I really like this vegetable broth because the ingredients are so clean, and it has a lot of different other ingredients in there, like carrot, celery, onions, leeks, mushrooms, garlic. So it adds other nutrients that we're not necessarily adding directly into the soup. So I like that about it. And I think we have another, Muir Glen and Eden. Yep, those are the good BPA-free brands. So I added the vegetable broth in there. And then you'll just want to have this simmer for about 15 minutes. And at this point, you can add the crushed red pepper as well. And I'm kind of eyeballing it. I'm just kind of sprinkling some in there. And I'm going to add just like a quarter teaspoon of salt, only because my vegetable broth did have a little bit of sea salt, and so did the tomato, so I'm adding very little. And again, I'm kind of just eyeballing it, but I'm adding in about a quarter teaspoon. You can play around with it if you want to add, you know, half teaspoon, 1 teaspoon, whatever you think makes sense. And you can always taste it too. Taste it to see how you like it. If maybe it needs a little bit more flavor, you can add some more salt to it, or like other seasonings as well. Basil is a really good one. Now in this soup, the other day when I made this soup, I actually added roasted red peppers to it, and that gave it a really great flavor. You could add carrots, celery. It all gets blended together, and it's just another way to kind of like add in more nutrients. And that's why I love soup, because you're able to get so many different nutrients in like an easy form that you can just like drink. So I like that about soups, as well as for smoothies too. I like that about smoothies as well. And I wanted to just show you another thing. So if you do decide to freeze some of these soups, I wanted to show you these containers that I have. You can easily get them on like Amazon, and they just make it really simple. And then these are just like non-toxic, you know, non-BPA lined, just paper, you know, made out of paper, strong paper, but these are completely non-toxic. And then you can just like put a label on there or write, you know, what soup it is. So this makes it a lot easier, and it doesn't take up a lot of space. Obviously you can also use glass containers too. So those are the, you know, a couple of things that I wanted to mention. So this is cooking now. I'm going to put it down to simmer, and just like kind of let this simmer for about 15 minutes. And now the only other things that I wanted to mention, so to kind of walk you through the rest of the recipe, we'll let this simmer for about 15 minutes, and then let it sit for just a few minutes, depending on the type of blender you have. My blender can actually handle hot liquids, like soup. So for that, you know, I just let it kind of sit for a few minutes, because I don't want it to be like boiling when I put it into my blender. So you will want to put that. You'll want to drain the cashews. So I have these, like I mentioned, I have these kind of sitting here, softening up a little bit. And then you just blend it, adjust the seasonings. If you need to add a little bit more salt, you can also add some crushed black pepper. You can also add some red pepper. So, you know, and then you can also add other things like basil, spinach. If you want to kind of blend in some spinach in there, get some extra nutrients, you can definitely do that too. So there's a lot of different options. So I hope this was helpful. This was day 1 of our day 3 challenge. It's not too late to join. If you know other, you know, if you have other friends and family that might want to join, they can definitely still join. Just send me a message, and I will send over the link, the sign up link, and then you'll get the recipes. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm really excited about this challenge, and I really hope you guys like the soup. Again, when you are making this soup, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to reach out to me. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow at 12.